So let's start with one of my stronger beliefs, and that is my belief in life insurance. And I'll break that down a few different ways, but the first one I want to start with is the fact that I believe that life insurance is critically important to have when somebody dies, regardless of whether they are 2 or 102, regardless of whether they are super affluent or super poor. Life insurance needs to be in force when somebody dies. And so therefore, what that translates into is that at some point in time, people have to start acquiring some level of permanent life insurance. I've heard a few different statistics, but somewhere around 91, 92, or 93% of all life insurance never pays a claim because it's in the form of term insurance. And term insurance isn't around when you pass away. And therefore, you've got to start to own it. So let me give you a couple examples of what is behind that makes me believe that. The obvious ones are, for a young family. When most people think about having life insurance, they think about, I've got a spouse, I've got a lot of debt, I'm nowhere near financially secure, I've got young children who have a long future in front of them, and if I'm not able to stay alive, healthy, and well and provide for them, I need to have life insurance step in and play that role. So that's one that you don't really have to sell or talk too much about with a young client. They view it as a window. I get married and have my first kid, and then at some point in time in my early to mid 50s, when my kids are out of the house, my mortgage will be paid off, I don't need it anymore. So therefore they view it as, I got a 20 or a 25-year window, so I'm gonna buy it as cheap as I can, and then I'll drop it down the road. Little do they know that they're gonna need it and want it until the day they die. And there's so many other scenarios that back that up. Let's first talk about one that might not be so obvious. Let's talk about my mom. If I were to share with you my mom's story today is she's 86 years old. My dad passed away about 15 years ago, and my mom has 14 grandchildren. And if I were to step away from my mom just for a second, what I think I've learned also to be true with every human being, they want their life to matter, especially to people that they love. So now let's go back to my mom's scenario. She has 14 grandchildren. My mom would love to be able to leave a legacy, leave a lasting memory, somewhat financially to each one of those grandchildren. But she's not in a spot to do that. She has a pension and she has Social Security. And I remember a tough conversation that I had to have with her about 2 or 3 years ago, where my siblings called me up and said, hey, you gotta go talk to mom because she'll listen to you. She gave each one of the grandchildren $100 at Christmas time. And I went to her and I said, Mom, you can't do that anymore. You don't have the money to do that. And I didn't think it would be that difficult of a conversation for her to have, but it was really heartbreaking the following Christmas for me to see her stand up in front of all of her grandchildren and tell them how much she loved them and how sorry she was that she could no longer give them that $100 check. And she started to cry. It crushed me. But at the end of the day, it's not just that $100 check. I know that, when she goes into the Lord's hands someday, if she knew prior to that she could leave each one of her grandchildren, let's say $10,000 each, that would make her life so much more significant in her mind. Now, us children and the grandchildren don't need that from grandma, but I know she would love to do that. So let's think about that scenario. She has no debt. She has nobody that's financially dependent on her. All of her children are grown up and have their own careers. So mortgage, children, college, all the things that most people think they need life insurance for are long in the past for her. However, for her to also put herself in a situation where she knows that she will absolutely not be a burden to her children financially, imagine if way back in her 30s, she started buying a chunk of permanent insurance. And for the last 20 or 30 years, the dividends had been paying the premiums. And it was enough to be able to give each one of the grandchildren a $10,000 check at her passing and also give her the peace of mind to know that she would never be a financial burden. Now, once again, I don't need that from my mom. I'm just saying that's what my mom would love to do. And an 86-year-old widow who has none of those financial obligations is not somebody that you would picture in the dictionary of someone who needs life insurance when you start first investigating it. But now that she is 86 years old, she wishes she would have it. The other thing I believe around that is that it's very difficult for young people to know and have a strong belief system on what it is that they're going to need 30 and 40 and 50 and 60 years down the road. But the problem is once they have that aha, once they realize because they are at that time in their life that they do need it, it's way too late to acquire it. And therefore, as a rep, I knew that those individuals I was working with 30 and 40 and 50 years down the road were going to need it. And therefore, it was my belief, my conviction, my power that would tell those stories to get those clients to get it when they were young so they would have it when they were older. That's just one example that's not so obvious of why I believe everybody needs life insurance when they die. Another example that isn't so obvious, if you have a business owner, and it's not too uncommon where you have a family where there's multiple children and some want to succeed their father or mother in the business and some don't. And so then you have the dilemma between the parents is that if we've got a small business, and let's say we have 3 children, and one of our daughters wants to take over the business when mom and dad move on, and the other 2 children want nothing to do with the business. And then they can feel a little bit guilty because the inheritance and what they leave behind to 3 children is very hard to equate, especially if the business is fairly successful because they most likely will not have enough assets outside of the business to equate the inheritance to the 2 that don't get in the business. So if you don't have life insurance to do that, it can present some problems. And then those problems can translate into family friction. And if family is a core value of yours and the love that is shared with family members is a big deal, you don't want to have that friction. And where that can occur is that the 2 children that don't want to be in the business still get an ownership piece in the business so that parents can equate the level of inheritance. Now they're not involved in the business, but they still have a say in the business. And then you have the other child that is in the business and they're running it every single day, blood, sweat, and tears. There's potential conflict because the 2 that aren't involved still can have a say in the company because they own shares of it. Whereas if life insurance to those individuals, that mom and dad in that example are there, what you can do is leave the business to the individual who's going to take it over, and you can leave the death benefit proceeds to the other 2 that aren't going to take it over. There's no family friction. The parents feel a tremendous sense of pride, and they also recognize that they were really equal in what they left to each one of their children, which to a lot of parents is pretty important. But they didn't know that when they were in their 20s or 30s. In that particular example, they might not even have been a business owner at that point in time. And so the story I want to share with everybody is the most powerful thing you can have in multiple aspects of life are options. And if you start acquiring permanent life insurance in your early 20s to late 20s to early 30s, you put yourself in a situation where you have a lot of options down the road for scenarios that when at the time you bought it, you had no idea were going to exist. But it's too late to get it once you're there. That's another strong belief of mine.